If we can't talk to each other, we're not going to make it.
Sometimes I feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew.
Most of the time, I work in a glass jar and lead a very uneventful life.
A face full of glass hurts like hell when you're in it.
That's weird. That glass looks half full to me.
Eating glass.
Eating glass and staring into the abyss.
Glass? Who gives a shit about glass? Who the fuck is this?
It's kind of part of our culture to eat glass.
I'm gonna get some safety goggles next time.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Chewing Glass, the show where we talk to developers building in the Solana ecosystem. Today we have with us somebody that most of you probably know, Mert, the co-founder of Helius and one of the more recent champions of the Solana blockchain. How's it going, Mert?
Hey Chase, thanks for having me.
Really good to have you on the show. You've been around a lot lately and been doing some really incredible stuff, and really just wanted to get you on the show and sort of talk about some things. But the way we normally start the show is to talk about sort of where you started, not necessarily how you got into Solana quite yet, but more so you're an engineer, obviously. You're writing code all the time. Well, more recently, it sounds like you're actually using AI to write your code for you, but we'll just sort of leave that to the side. But where did you get your career started, with software development?
Yeah, definitely. So I majored in applied math and computing and communications engineering. Communications engineering being signals and stuff like that, satellites. And while I was in school for that, I wanted to really major or have a career in pure math or physics.
Oh man, TJ Littlejohn. Did you know TJ Littlejohn was a huge pure math guy as well? Because when he was on the show, he's a big math guy, if you didn't know that.
I did not. Love TJ though. Yeah, so was a pretty big math fan. And then funny enough, I actually got an internship to work for BlackBerry, where I was working on the infrastructure cloud team there, working on the cloud that hosted BBM, if you remember BBM. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but it kind of made me appreciate the shipping aspect and the practicality of software development much more. And basically I was red-pilled after that, and I wanted to just ship stuff instead of doing theoretical math work.
And what languages were you writing your code at the time?
So JavaScript and jQuery, believe it or not. Some random infra stuff like chef cookbooks, Ansible, bare metal cloud infra stuff like Bash, etc. That's when I also first, so this is still in school, I took a lot of cryptography courses, obviously, and that's when I also first heard about blockchain, but I didn't really think much of it at that point. I kind of figured you need a PhD to do anything meaningful, but obviously it was quite wrong.
So that's where you started your career. Was there any sort of progression from there? Can I ask you how old you are?
Guess how old I am.
27?
Yeah, I'm 27.
Oh, nice.
Very good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you started there, BlackBerry, you were using jQuery and a bunch of interesting languages at the time. So where'd you go from there, before you are to where you are now? Yeah,
so I worked at 3 of the largest banks in Canada. So Canada is run by 5 banks really. So I worked at 3 of them, building payments infrastructure for withdrawing from ATMs and stuff. I did some cybersecurity at a few banks. And I also helped build the infrastructure for the trading engines and some of the investment products. And then after kind of being fed up by the banks, I worked at a fintech called Clearbank, which is only one of the only few unicorns in Canada. And there I was in charge of the treasury tech lead position. So moving funds, helping build virtual cards that entrepreneurs can use for their business expenses and stuff, kind of like Brex. And that's kind of where I noticed all the inefficiencies within the current financial infrastructure. And then basically there was this occurrence that happened where we were trying to fund entrepreneurs in Australia. And to do that from Canada, we need to jump through all these different jurisdictions in the world. It wasn't just as simple as sending USDC on Solana. And I suggested hey guys, why don't we just use Bitcoin or something for this? And basically everybody just laughed at me and they were like, haha, that's a scam. What are you even doing? And then I didn't think that was a great answer. And so basically the next month I started working at Coinbase.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I completely forgot about that you actually went over to Coinbase. It's interesting that I had no idea that like your career is like you spent your time in math and then finance and then doing a lot of those things. And then that led you to Coinbase, which is somewhere in the middle of all those things. So like, how was that? I don't want to put you on blast about Coinbase, but like Coinbase is a great company. I think we all, like most of us, can agree on that. So like, how was your experience working there?
Yeah, I mean, Coinbase honestly was quite great. I learned a ton there. A lot of incredibly smart people, anything from like actual cryptographers to protocol engineers to like just like really smart marketing people. It's interesting because like basically my career went from like the most bureaucratic form of finance, like large banks, to fintech, to crypto. And so I kind of got experience with each of those kind of different segments. What was great about Coinbase is basically I was on the team called the Financial Hub team. And basically this team is in charge of all the fund movements, balances, and transaction histories at Coinbase. So like if you place a trade on Coinbase or move money, or just view your portfolio history, et cetera, that's some of the stuff I helped build. And you really learn a ton about all the different, because obviously like I wanted to be good at my job, like massive tryhard here. And so I read all the like white papers of the different EVM chains, Avalanche, et cetera, and also Solana. That's how I came across Solana. And I just really learned a ton. And whenever you had questions, Coinbase has like all these public channels on Slack where you can just post stuff and some like OG who like created USDC or something will answer you. So it's like a pretty cool environment.
Yeah, so that sort of leads me into my next question. You're working at Coinbase, you're doing some cool stuff. You just got out of the traditional finance world and sort of working in Coinbase. It's probably one of a really good time for Coinbase. This was actually my first intro into crypto was using Coinbase, and like I had a good experience until I stopped using sexes altogether over the past few years. But so you did a bunch of research on all these different blockchains. You could ask questions. And then I think I remember before you even left Coinbase, maybe we interacted on Twitter at some point. Maybe you DM'd me. Maybe it was a sort of a public message. But like, what was sort of this point when, and I think I even talked to you where you were going to be doing indexers on not only Solana. It was going to be actually more than one ecosystem, that sort of transition. But like, what made you make that jump and being like, all right, Solana's the chain. This is where I'm going and I'm going to build this really cool shit there. So like, how'd that happen for you?
Yeah, I think kind of, so I don't want to give too long of an answer here for the sake of the mental sanity of the watchers here, but basically like two reasons. One like theoretical, one like actually like case study, I guess. The theoretical reason was that like, obviously I read all these different white papers and the EVM chains seem to have this approach to scaling that was very conditional, right? Where it's like, if the merge goes through, then if sharding, if dank sharding, if L2s, it's like, okay, if users are still around in 5 years at that point, then we're scaling. And it's like, obviously, every probability that you have that's less than 100%, you're reducing the probability by chaining those conditionals. Whereas Solana, I read it and it was like, it has some pretty cool stuff, like, you know, just parallelizing like state auctions and stuff like that. And I'm also like a big hardware kind of nerd, let's say. And I just really like loved the simplicity of just, you know, you leverage the hardware that's actually already available to you and then scale as fast as possible. And so that was kind of the more theoretical reason. And then like, I guess more of like an actual thing that happened was there was like this designer at Coinbase who released like a free NFT on ETH. And he's like, hey guys, like just made a free NFT for all Coinbase. So that's actually what Coinbase people are called, Coinbase. I went to go mint it and I was like, oh, sweet, like free NFT. And it actually came to like, I think $320 Canadian because of the gas. And I was like, wait a minute, like this isn't that free, is it? That got me really annoyed. So I actually like instantly, like that second, just downloaded Phantom, or not download, I guess added to my Chrome, and started playing around with like Radium, Orca, and and a bunch of like new mints that were happening. Obviously, it was full of rugs back then, but I started like basically just minting a lot of stuff on Solana because it was just so much cheaper. And then I would like try to flip those and, stuff like that. And basically like somewhere along the road there, I was obviously quite active on Twitter, just usually shit posting. And I saw a bunch of people like making these claims like, Solana NFTs are in a bear market because like the price of Solana went up.
Just random Twitter stuff.
Yeah, like alpha art is like
random Twitter stuff.
Much better than like Magic Eden or something. And I'd be like, where are you guys getting this information from? Like, sounds like BS to me. And so what I ended up doing was, this was before like any analytics platforms or anything like that, like Hello Moon, or I just wrote a bunch of scripts and the data pipelines on my own. And I would just analyze this data myself in real time and make like charts. And then I would basically post threads on Twitter, and then like people for some reason ended up engaging with it, like pretty like prominent people as well, which I was like, okay, like this community is really awesome. And then I, started building bots and stuff for a bunch of different people, and then kind of just took off from there.
Cool. I mean, like you sort of just, I was actually, if you weren't going to mention it, I was going to ask about the sort of community aspect, if that also had, because you came in at a time when like there was a peak point where like everybody was so stoked. If somebody like you come in and start sharing all this stuff, it's like, holy shit, this guy doesn't even work like on a protocol. He's just here like sharing information and doing really cool stuff. And like that stuff in the community is really sort of cheered upon. So what made you stick around? Was it that? Was it more the sort of tech side where like you started going down the rabbit hole of like what's possible in Solana? Was it like the community was like, this is the one for me, or a combination of both? Like just like help me understand, or the listeners sort of understand what that experience was like. Yeah.
So I think, so kind of like a sequence of events for context. I essentially came onto Solana like around the DGen Apes mint. So this is like right around the time before it really took off. And I think it was actually you who posted something on Twitter about like who would like to help. Like we're looking for Solana devs or something like that. And you were trying to connect them with different ecosystem teams. And I wanted to actually just contribute to like open source stuff. And so I posted in that thread and I said, hey, I work at Coinbase. I'd love to help when I have time. And then I think you and Armani like followed me after that. And then you actually, I think, connected me with Orca, if I remember correctly. So I was talking to Orca for a while, but obviously I just joined Coinbase, so I wasn't going to just leave and work for Orca right away, which, might have been an interesting turn of events. But so, I mean, obviously I came for the tech, and the tech has not only not changed, it's actually improved quite a bit. Obviously, Firedancer is a big aspect of that. The local fee markets, priority fees, these outages, which is usually just performance degradation narrated as a downtime, which, don't get me started on that. But basically, like the tech has just been improving, right? So if my original hypothesis was that I'm here for the tech, that's only improved. So obviously that's one side of it. And then the community, though, is probably the best community that I'm aware of, at least. Not on just Twitter, but like in terms of developer communities as a whole. Anytime you make something and you ship it, people on Twitter are like, hell yeah, man, like LFG, like that's, cool stuff. They'll ask for, like how you did certain things. I have like a bunch of people DMing me pretty regularly asking for like certain Solana quirks. Obviously there's LamportDAO, which shows you like who's involved in the community, super team, etc. The community itself is honestly, and this, I'm sure every guest so far has probably said this, but like the community is quite impressive. And it's part of the reason why I stayed, but it never was like in doubt. Like the possibility of me leaving was never actually there. So like it was always because of the tech, but the community is just a massive added bonus for me.
Yeah, I mean, like even though that I work for Solana Foundation, it's what keeps me going every day. Like it was usually typically me and Armani out here, like sort of championing like a lot of these sort of threads, and then they'll like, now I sort of get to take a backseat to you. You've been pretty vocal and passionate. And like, this is what we want. At some point in time, like there needs to be the community takes over sort of this like big voice and it not need to come from anywhere near on the foundation side. And we're starting to see that. There's you and there's a handful of others that are starting to get that voice. And like, honestly, like it almost gives a little tear to my eye to just like see that happen. I'm like, hell yeah. You're so passionate about this. You're out here championing the like improving the developer experience on Solana and also just out there fighting for like the narrative that's the true narrative. And like, what is it about you that's making you do that outside of like, you have Helius. We'll talk a little bit also about LamportDAO, which has spun up recently, a developer community. But like, what keeps you going, and like, why are you instead of just being heads down coder and you're this math guy who loves the tech? Why are you out here doing what you're doing? Like, and what feeds the need for you to be so vocal out there in public like that?
Basically, two things I would say. One is that I deeply believe in the potential of crypto to improve the current state of the world, not only as a society, but also just in terms of technology, in terms of like financial payment rails and financial economic freedom. I mean, that's my driving force behind pretty much everything, is that I actually just believe crypto can help improve the world. And the reason why I'm so passionate about Solana is because I think Solana's got the best chance at doing that. Right? Like I can already send money to my dad in Turkey with USDC on Solana in 400 milliseconds, right? I can, use a multi-sig with my girlfriend for unnecessary purchases and stuff. There's just a bunch of apps that already work very well and the chain already functions. I'm passionate about it because I think crypto is extremely important and Solana is essentially the best chance we have at scaling right now. Number two is a bit more pride to do with my personality. I'm just a shit poster and a grumpy troll, essentially. And every time I see somebody post complete nonsense, which is quite frequently about Solana for some reason, I look at it and I'm like, my goodness, like how did that information even spread? Like it's just so blatantly false. I must correct it. It's kind of like probably a mental problem. Funny story, actually. So I was doing research like when I was working at Coinbase about like the different consensus algorithms, and Justin Bonds, I'm sure some people have seen his, threads. He posted something like, Solana's founders are fraudulent because they have like deterministic block creation on the chain. And I remembered like just last week I was researching this, and it's like, first of all, Ethereum also has the same design. And furthermore, I think most proof of stake chains actually have this except for Algorand, where the Rand is literally in the name. And so this guy is just completely talking out of his, I don't know how PG this podcast is, but like he's just not speaking accurately. And so I made a post about that. I made a thread about it, and then like Tolly and a bunch of like other like big CT people like retweeted and stuff. And I was like, okay, clearly this needs to be done because people are just talking a lot of inaccurate stuff about Solana. And obviously Foundation and Labs can only say so much because you guys don't want to come across as, certain people from other chains who I won't name, but you don't want the leaders of the chain and especially official employees to be, saying anything too hostile or aggressive. Whereas I don't have that restriction. I can kind of say, hey, you're actually just wrong, and here's why you're wrong. And since a lot of people are quite wrong about Solana all the time, it's just, I see it and I, try to get some data to back it up. And I hit reply pretty much.
Well, you do an excellent job of it, and you're right. And like this sort of stuff does need to come from the community. But like I think I can speak for everybody when we say like we truly appreciate it, and it's really important that the people that are out there doing what you're doing are truly informed when they're making those responses, because otherwise it just looks like a bunch of crazy people yelling at each other. So like having that sort of voice of understanding and reason is really important. But like one thing that I've learned personally that I know you have to go through is that like this actually does like can like affect you like in sort of like mental deterioration when you're constantly doing that, especially when you're trying to focus on coding. I know you like drink tons of coffee and Diet Coca-Cola, but like that'll only get you so far, because this is an exhausting sort of industry when you're out there having to spend time when you should be working on your business, having to do what you do. But again, it's super appreciated. I want to get into, initially it had no name. Then a vote took place, and now we're calling it LamportDAO. For all the listeners, Lamport is the smallest value of a soul. So this is named after Leslie Lamport, one of Anatoly's idols, apparently. And it was really cool to see that group form. And now you guys are talking about like all the different things that you can do to improve the ecosystem. I know right now, I think in discussions we've had, it doesn't have its true identity yet. You really just sort of like sounded the alarm. People came in, ideas are sort of getting thrown around. But the way I've seen these groups form in the past, like Super Team DAO started as just a Discord, and now it's like grown into this global thing. So, I mean, I guess maybe you can describe just a little bit about like the sort of reason for putting together LamportDAO and like sort of what's the current state of that group.
Yeah, absolutely. So my at least rationale for starting it was like, so Ethereum obviously has like developer DAO, and it seemed to me like most of the developer community stuff on Solana was driven obviously by Foundation, which is great. That should be happening. But there also needs to be a community-driven aspect to it, because like obviously, as I said before, there's certain things that Foundation can't be doing, or otherwise it'll be seen as like king-making, right? Or like picking winners and favorites. And so there needs to be like a much more community-driven aspect to some of these things. And so that was, I mean, I just said like, you know, I threw the idea out into the wild, like what if we had developer DAO on Solana? And a lot of people said like, hell yeah. And then I was like, okay. And then I just basically created a Discord, gathered a bunch of people who I think would be good leaders for it. Like, you know, Italo from Ironforge, who's been on the show before, Chris from Dialects, and a bunch of others like Soji from Solend. And basically we just started this group. And I made it invite only just to make sure that we get like actual Solana developers.
It's smart to do. I actually created a group previously, and like if you open this up too early, bots come in, it becomes a nightmare, too many voices, and they'll just die. So I think you made a really smart decision by just doing that invite only off at the beginning. It helps a lot. So that was very smart.
Yeah, it wasn't planned, but I'll take it. So my goal right now is for it to be a social hub for developer community on Solana. So people post about like job opportunities there, show off what they've built. Also, like, you know, Monkey DAO is now doing this thing where they're like airdropping rewards to Solana developers. So they're using LamportDAO for that. Super Team is actually helping as well. Obviously, Solana just had that Discord integration. And, you know, I was chatting with John and like Foundation and helping them test that. So it's kind of the goal, like you said, so me and you talked about this earlier, but I'm just trying to determine like exactly, okay, what does that look like? What does Solana need? Is it really education to go from like mid-level developer to like a senior Solana developer, because that's what most teams are looking for, as opposed to entry level? Is it just a social hub where you get like perks and discounts from other Solana, you know, ecosystem teams, which we already have right now, by the way. So we're basically just trying to figure that out. We do have like a pretty involved, I call them Scrum Masters, like group of leaders who have like admin privileges, who actually just like host community calls or like staff calls and like figure out where we're going to go next. So it's still like quite early, but I do think there's a lot of potential there.
No, I agree. And over the last couple of years here at Solana Foundation, I'm like, my job is to actually look for Merts and then help them and empower them to get the shit done that they want to do. And like, this is really like how you scale an ecosystem. So, and it's really a group like LamportDAO, like you come together, you look around, like, should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? Over time, it starts to become more clear where you slot in, where you could support Super Team, where they could support you, and how you can leverage what they're doing and how they can leverage what you're doing. And eventually you just sort of have like this living, connected sort of ecosystem of these sort of autonomous groups. And I think like if the right people are in place, then it sort of just shows itself eventually, as long as you're sort of like paying attention. So again, really, really happy. I was stoked whenever I saw that thing go live. I was immediately just like, finally, somebody did it. So here we are. I want to talk about Helius. I think we've all seen you show Helius in about every single thread on Twitter, but that's besides the point. Like, let's talk about, like, I think I know why you created it, but I'll let you go ahead and just sort of speak briefly to why and like what is Helius for the listeners who don't know.
I guess I should start with what it is first. So Helius is a developer platform that's essentially tailor-made and vertically integrated for Solana to help abstract away the pain that comes with working on Solana as a developer. And okay, so why is it necessary, right? So kind of two reasons. So number one was that it was really hard to understand on-chain data. As I mentioned earlier, like in the earlier days of Solana, what I used to do was I used to there was a lot of like scams and rugs of different NFT mints or like DeFi projects. And what I would do is I would track, what's happening on chain and see like, okay, who's the thief? Is it related to somebody else? Like, can I figure out who they are? I work at Coinbase. Can I actually tell the security guys to potentially flag this account? So basically what I would do is I would just track scams on chain. And then I've actually like successfully frozen or helped freeze a few accounts on Binance from Solana rugs and like written up a few articles or helped write up a few articles on like Decrypt and stuff. And one thing that I noticed was that it's extremely hard to track stuff on chain on Solana. It's just hard to understand the block explorers and especially transaction histories of like wallets, right? Like you could make, some sort of DeFi transaction and then come back to it 6 months after. And then it's just like a bunch of cryptic kind of encodings and you don't actually know what you did. And then number two, basically there was like this big gap between like enterprise adoption and Solana. So for example, like Coinbase uses OpenSea and like Etherscan for like half their APIs for some of the ETH related stuff. On Solana, that doesn't really exist. And so if you're a brand or like a larger enterprise and you want to build on Solana, you usually have to use something subpar or like build something yourself to get started. And so there's like a big gap between like, the Web 2s and like the Web 2.5 companies and actually building on Solana. Discord is actually a good example of this, right? They need to keep track of all the different wallets that people have linked through Solana, and then they need to like watch those wallets in real time going forward. And obviously, they can't be bothered to set up a Geyser plugin and all this infrastructure. And so they just use Helius webhooks right now to do that. And so when you kind of combine those two things, you kind of arrive at why basically Helius is necessary and why we created it, which is to abstract away all the different pains of building on Solana, whether it's Geyser plugins or decrypt, or decode on-chain data to actually make it human readable. We have a lot of different future plans as well, like helping with like account streaming, account indexing, DeFi APIs, everything from essentially like the bare metal, like lowest possible stack to the highest possible pain points of any developer on Solana.
Yeah, cool. I was actually just about to ask what the future was. And like, I think I recently saw you mention something about like shifting and going over from NFTs to DeFi. And I think that's going to be super powerful. Obviously, like with a lot of some recent events, we definitely want to start like doing whatever we can to make it easier to build DeFi protocols. So that's going to be amazing. Mm-hmm. So we know why Helius needs to exist now. And outside of like what Helius is doing, you talk about making the developer experience easier. You're kind of focused on a specific area, at least right now. Like, what else is missing in the ecosystem? Like, what really sucks outside of the problem you're solving right now? So, like, what needs to be built to improve the developer experience on Solana?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a few things. One is like interfaces is a big problem. where you have all these individual programs, which kind of causes some centralizing functions, especially if those programs aren't immutable or governed by like sufficiently decentralized multisig, which you kind of just saw today with Radium. So interfaces is number one. Number two is nobody publishes their IDLs, right? And
I've heard you talk about this once or twice.
Yeah. I'm still kind of, some people, devs that I've talked to say it's because of security. Some just aren't even aware that you can publish IDLs for non-anchored programs, for example. Like there's different dimensions to this, but anything that helps with that is going to be super valuable so that we can actually understand what's happening on chain. Another big problem, the archival situation on Solana is not great right now. Basically, obviously Solana has a lot of historical data, and what most teams do is they run a big table instance, and that works, but it's quite expensive, and there's egress costs, and as Solana grows, it's not going to scale very well. And we're actually working on this right now at Helius, but there's also other teams, right? Richard Patel, he's working on like storing the archival ledger on Filecoin, for example. There's a few other teams. I think Triton might be working on improving this and maybe moving to like HBase instead of Bigtable and stuff like that. Maybe like another thing that's missing is kind of like a culture upgrade to like a more cypherpunk kind of mentality where teams should have at least the aim of freezing their programs.
Right.
Obviously, you can argue that, well, if the program is frozen, then that might inhibit innovation somewhat, which, fair enough. But it seems like it's quite skewed to that argument and not enough towards immutability at all. And so any sort of cultural upgrade we can get there, where we've pushed for more immutable programs, whether that's developer tooling or just pure culture and narrative, I think that would be highly beneficial.
Yeah, and to that point, I think like for Solana, because all these new primitives had to be like sort of recreated in Rust, and there's a whole new cohort of Rust, and not everybody's super experienced in the early stages, I think it makes sense to have these upgradable for a moment. But eventually, I think the core of that strengthens, and there should be more of a push for that same mentality that you're talking about. This is open sourcing, IDLs, like immutable programs, all that stuff I think comes in time. People still fail to realize how like immature and young Solana is. And like, that's not an excuse. The newer people coming in or the Web 2 people coming in need to be shown the reasons why they're doing what they're doing. It's not, okay, yes, it's for opportunity, but at the same time, there needs to be something else behind this. Like we're trying to do something different. I don't know the actual percentage, but when you look at those sort of the developer data on like how many developers there are on Solana right now, like if I had to give my best guess, I would say that like probably 70% of the ecosystem is closed source, roughly that. I'm sort of pulling that number out of my ass, but it's really, really high compared to Ethereum. And like, they're kind of forced to follow that ethos because their programs, I don't think can be upgradable in the first place. But at the same time, we need to inherit a lot of that. And over time, that gets diluted as people that come in as opportunists that don't really give a shit about really what Web3 was trying to solve in the first place. They're just here to like make some money and like build some cool shit on this buzzword that everybody's talking about. So 100% agree with you on that.
One other thing I'll mention, I'm not sure if this counts, but one thing that we need to do more of is build applications that can only be built on Solana, right? So obviously Solana has a clear scale advantage over other chains, but that doesn't mean anything on paper if it's not executed in practice, right? So order books are obviously a good example of this, where you can't really have an order book on ETH, and that's why AMMs exist in the first place. But it's actually quite important that we encourage people to build things that can only be built on Solana. I'm not sure if that means we look for those people and then convince them to use Solana, or, I'm not sure what that looks like, and that would like help limit kind of these vampire attacks from other ecosystems, right? Where they're like, here's like $5 million to build on our chain instead. it's like, well, actually, we literally can't because your chain can't support it. So I think that's something we need to think about as well.
Yeah, and honestly, that's sort of happening. Gaming's probably going to be the one that sort of is able to prove this out. And like Solana's not the only one like in the gaming world. Obviously, a lot of the top blockchains are also competing in this. But the real test comes if you actually land like one of these tier one games that has tens of millions of users, if they'll actually be able to handle the scale of that usage on the blockchain. We know Solana will, but like we're not really sure if these other ones will, if it's actually used. So we'll just leave it at that. So to wrap things up, what's your advice to new devs coming into Solana and in Web3? Like what? If you were talking to yourself or like somebody you really wanted to get in, like your past self, like what advice would you give them in order to like not just learn Solana, but also like to be successful in Web3 and the space?
Okay, so I think my number one advice would be ship something and take action as soon as humanly possible. Literally just pick a problem that you have or that others might have, any inefficiency at all, like any sort of issue, and just try to solve it, right? Try to build something for yourself and make sure you actually execute. So what I mean by that is do not just read about the different consensus mechanisms of different chains or Solana and like try to have like a perfect understanding of like Turbine or something before you code. Just write the code, right? And then you'll figure it out like, okay, oh, that's why this is necessary, right? So like, why do I have to specify all these different accounts ahead of time when I'm in Solana, but not on Ethereum? It's like, well, it's so that we know, which states are being written to, right? Oh, now that makes sense, right? So that's essentially how I got started, right? I didn't like people posting completely unbased claims. And so I said, okay, I'll literally just the chain is public. So I'll just write a few scripts. I didn't know anything about how to work with Solana, like the Web3.js library. I didn't know that you had to call get signatures for address first and then call get transactions to actually figure out the transactions. I didn't know like the different commitment levels. I didn't know any of this. Anyway, so not to go on too much of a tangent, but basically my advice would be just build something, just solve a problem and then ship it.
And use Helius webhooks.
Yeah. So, yeah. Obviously, like if you do get stuck, feel free to, shoot me a DM and we'll try to help you out. But, just try to build something like anything. And you'll notice there's a ton of problems.
Yeah, I think it's good. I mean, it's really great advice because you get sort of stuck in that sort of tutorial hell world and you end up never shipping and you don't really finish. So really great advice. Anyways, Mert, it was great to have you on. Thanks for joining today and see you next time, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.